Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 220.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers who are looking to shoot lower scores. Dedicated to professional club fitting, putting and short game improvement, and effective practice techniques to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to sharing useful information on professional club fitting, putting and short game improvement, and effective practice techniques, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time. In September of 2018, I did an interview with Gordon Morrison, an Irish PGA professional who's now based in Norway. At that time, he was just starting an effort to complete a PhD in sports psychology and motor control, where he would investigate the chipping yips. Well, Gordon Morrison is now Dr. Gordon Morrison, and it was delightful and interesting to have him share some of his investigation results and insights about the chipping yips.
Tony Wright and Game Improvement Golf, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time.
Hello, this is Tony Wright with episode 220 of the Golf Improvement Podcast, and I want to welcome back Dr. Gordon Morrison, an Irish PGA professional who's the head coach at Vestford Golf Club, I believe, in Norway. Gordon's interested in all things related to mental and skills development, but the topic for today is he recently completed a PhD in sports psychology and motor control with a focus on investigating the yips in chipping, and that is what a fascinating topic. So welcome back, Gordon.
Thank you, Tony. Yes, I believe it's been 7 years since I spoke to you.
Oh my gosh, it was September 2018. I went back, episode 115. So, but first, congratulations, Dr. Morrison, right? That's a good deal.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for the award. Actually, I've submitted everything. I had some minor corrections, or had some corrections to do, and they're submitted. So, just hopefully a matter of time before the award is given to me. And it's when I spoke to you last, I was about 3.5 years in, and I thought I was nearly done. And COVID, and I moved countries because I was based in the UK then, and COVID and everything. I lost 2 years over that, and so it's dragged out. But anyway, it's done.
Yeah. So the title of your thesis is The Golfing Yips, Developing, Understanding, and Demonstrating Effectiveness of a Coaching Intervention for a Distressing and Disabling Fine Motor Skill Dysfunction. And I've seen some people on the golf course who have the chipping yips, and, a lot of them just putt. I'm sure you've seen that.
That's right. I mean, that title is a bit of a mouthful, but I try to, that's the official title. So it's, but that was what I started out with, was that, there was really nothing out there in terms of research. And this is probably getting into maybe one of your questions,
sure, but
actually.
That's fine. Yeah.
And I did a little study in 2014, published in 2015, just as I started my research with a more experienced researcher. And we knew from scanning the literature or mining the literature that there was nothing out there. And yet, as a golf coach, I mean, I'm primarily a golf coach. People came to me with the problem. I'd seen it numerous times over the years, and I knew a problem existed. But of course, we had to set out to sort of show that there was a problem, and it is distressing for people, and it is disabling. So that hence those terms in the title. So there was nothing out there. So that's one of the reasons, not the best reason in the world to ever study anything, but also, the differences between chipping and putting. a number of researchers said to me who had putting yips research experience, they said to me, you'll probably find that chipping is the same as putting. It'll be a dominant hand problem because the skills are so closely related or closely enough related. And that's just not the case. And I knew that instinctively. But, that's no good in research, is it? You've got to come up with some hypotheses. And yeah, anyway, that's how it got started.
Well, it's going to be, you're going to dive into some of those things as we go along in our interview. But so, at the time we talked, I mean, you were sort of at the start, but the first two phases of your research concentrated on doing a literature survey and then some interviews with golfers related to the chipping yips. So talk a little bit about the main takeaways from those sort of starting efforts and how they guided you into the later phases of your research.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And the primary reason for doing the research was to assist people with the problem and more specifically to maybe help coaches deal with the problem. And maybe in that vein, then, just to put people's mind at rest, it's how many people came forward with an initial online survey from around the world just to say they had the yips and give me a brief account of their experience. So in the end, it was around 600 people filled in an online questionnaire. And, from that, the key takeaways there were that yes, putting is the most common yips type, let's call it, with 37% of people, experiencing only putting yips. But the interesting thing was 32% of people had both chipping and putting yips, so raising the putting percentage to about 69%, and then chipping yips people were in total 51% of respondents.
Yeah.
And then we had only 12% of people had what you call full swing yips, often called driver yips, but it could be any long club. So, it seems quite common there. I got 600 people with just a link on a magazine website. And just probably because I'll forget later on, but if you look at all the research on putting and now my little bit of research on chipping, probably 1 in 4 golfers has something. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 golfers has some kind of problem you could describe as or define as yips. So people shouldn't feel bad when they get it, because it's very, very common.
It sounds like a huge number, really, when you think about it, isn't it?
It must be. There must be, I don't know how many million golfers there are in the world, but apparently in the UK and Ireland, there's about 6 million who some do some kind of regular golf activity. So that would give us a huge number, wouldn't it? You're talking about 1 million people.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is probably the most fascinating thing, is why is golf so much more severely affected than anything else? And professional musicians, I think it's around 1 or 2% are affected with something yips like, and yet we have golfers that I think it was 22% was my estimate, having looked at all the studies. So, but I'll get into that maybe towards the end as to what's causing it in golf. I've got some ideas around that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned when we first dove back into doing this interview that you'll be excited to talk about some of the 3D investigations you did related to movement characteristics. So talk a little bit about these, how many folks you did it with, things like that. But what were the most interesting elements of what you learned from them? And are there any consistent kind of concepts that golfers have? I have this feeling about a lot of things related to the yips, and I'm not an investigator, but they're mental concepts about that what they think they're doing or how they're creating strokes have to have some influence on it.
Yep. Very good. Just before I get to that, I'm just going to say on the results of the first part of the study, what was surprising was, to me anyway, was that half of the people couldn't give me a time that it started. They sort of said, it happened over time. And the other half said, no, it happened suddenly, and I could tell you where I was.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. Because that's what I thought. I thought everybody could tell you where it started, because it was it was a sudden start. So that's not the case. About half of the people don't remember. And even more interesting, I think the people who could remember when it started, about 50% of the time they were just practicing.
Oh,
Rather than under some kind of pressure, which was that's the, I suppose, the myth really about it, is that it's pressure starts it, or anxiety starts it. It's an anxiety stroke psychological problem. And I think, of course, that's a factor, but I think what we have is probably most likely a motor problem.
yeah.
that then that then gets worse or starts suddenly, and it stresses people out. So, of course you're going to have negative thoughts, anxiety, and so on. But often that's a consequence as opposed to a starting thing. And about half of the people I interviewed, this was more detailed, 10 people I interviewed so there was more detail on this part. They described overanalyzing things as a factor. So 5 of these people I interviewed said at the time it started, no fault of any coaching, but they might have had some coaching that was causing them to think about what they were doing. Or, as a couple of them told me, they were just analyzing themselves and trying to do everything. So it kind of broke down for them based on paralysis by analysis, let's call it. But the others had no clear reason for it. It was like one day they were fine, and the next day just warming up. One guy told me, just warming up to go out to play. I thinned one, I hit one heavy, and then I thinned one across the green again, and went out to play and thinned and heavied everything that day. And he said that's how it began, so it was just warming up. So maybe on those things that they were interesting things to me anyway about the chipping yips. And then in terms of the 3D investigation, I mean, I had some preconceived ideas. I had seen guys, bend their knees after impact. I had seen people retract, almost pull the handle of the club towards their belly button as they hit the ball, and things like that. But we had 3 significant findings on that, because we had to go with, we looked at about 50 elements in 3D, but only 3 turned out to be significant. And that, surprisingly, some of it was at address. They had let's describe it as a less offset angle between the arms and the club at address. When you view it from down the line, if somebody's putting, it'll be very low offset angle usually, and then if somebody's hitting a driver, there's quite a high offset angle between the arms and the club. But with yippers at address, they had their hands higher than normal golfers. And maybe in conclusion, I thought that might be some means of trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
So they had this high hands, let's
sort
call it high hands
lots of
position.
ulnar deviation then, or something, or?
Yeah, I think that's the right term. Yeah, I'm not a biomechanics guy, but I think that's the right term. It's kind of like a putting. It's like as if you're going to do a chip putt and you had the heel of the club off the ground. That type of angle there was reduced at address and also at impact. So their hands were higher at impact than, or further away from the ball. Less offset angle between the club and the hands at impact. But most significant was that yippers appeared to have the club a lot closer to them at impact than normal chippers. So as if to be pulling the club a little bit towards them as they struck the ball. But I mean, a closer inspection in the data showed that the downswing was really variable, in the dimension of, when a player swings back and their hands are usually inside the target line as they swing back. And then once they started down, the journey of the hands back to the ball, let's say from the player's toes to where the ball was, that dimension, again, best viewed from down the line, it was chaotic. And if you look at a normal chipper, it was quite a smooth movement back to the ball, but the yippers had a very jerky movement, not surprising. but really variable on how they got their hands back down to the ball. And you can see that on some diagrams. I can furnish you with some of the diagrams.
Yeah.
Even a lay person could look at that diagram and go, "Oh wow, this is a lot more like somebody scribbled the club's path back down to the ball rather than it's a smooth arc that should have been." So yeah, we found a few things, but I didn't find anything in the knees. I didn't find anything at all in the dimension of, if you view the player from face on, what the club is doing in that access was pretty normal. So the chip and yip seemed to disrupt two things. It seemed to disrupt the path of the club back to the ball, like almost like the swing plane angle or the back to the ball. And then the height of the club was also very erratic with the yippers. So the height and the plane, I suppose, if we use to our terms, but not the angle of attack.
Because
more or less.
Sometimes, at least I would have thought, they would get their hands really far forward because they're struggling, and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens,
Yeah, so that element, when you look at the players from face on and what their hands and club were doing, looks pretty normal. But what's not normal is when you view from down the line, you can see how erratic the club is moving back to the ball. And I think that's where I stand if I'm going to look at someone who's got chip and yips to check them out. I'd stand down the line because you'll see the deviations in the hand path, and also more after the ball. The club's arc, let's call it, is quite unnatural. So a trained eye, like a coach, could spot it if they know where to look.
And you can take video and, without doing 3D, you could probably slow it down and see how it is and different things like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got some, I'm sure some of the coaches listening will have, or the players will have access to a SAM putt lab.
Yeah.
And there's a guy who's done some research on yips too, Christian Marquand. But even if you play a little short chip on a SAM putt lab, you can do it. I asked Christian if it was possible. As long as it's not too long, you can see some of the disruption on the SAM putt lab too. You just see the handle doing some really weird stuff as they approach the ball. But that's the hands. Obviously, the SAM lab doesn't measure the hands. At least mine doesn't. Right. It just measures the club. So yes, there's disruption, and it happens, before the ball, before and at the ball. That's what my take on it was.
Yeah. Now, you said with the SAM, do you have the 3D add-on to SAM?
No, I've got the basic system.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? I wonder if you could, I don't know, if with whatever system you have now. Yeah. Because you can see a lot of things about how people are moving things, from that.
Yeah, on the SAM putt lab, when you look at it, the handle just appears to do a funny kind of an arc somewhere near the ball. It deviates completely from what you'd expect it to do. You'd expect it to continue on an arc if you look at the butt of the club.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes towards the ball and steepens the lie of the club. And that's what I've seen with the SAM putt lab, although that wasn't part of the research. That's just more pilot studies and so on. So yeah, you can use, or maybe I haven't used it, but I would have thought something like the Hack Motion device might be useful. I haven't used it yet. I don't know, but that monitors what the hands are doing. So I would guess that would show some good data.
So do you think that's like a reaction to something going on inside of them, or, what is a view of cause and effect, right?
Yeah, that is the $50,000 question, Tony.
Yeah.
And in you only have to go onto YouTube or Twitter, X, and there's any amount of claims that it can be cured. But given that I still don't understand what exactly it is. Is it, it's a movement disorder, but undefined. It has elements sometimes of focal task dystonia. If you look up the Mayo Clinic on focal dystonia, they give a very good overview of that, and that's like things that musicians get. I have it, which I think I told you the last time, in my handwriting from overuse. That's a focal dystonia, neurological thing. But then it also has psychological aspects to it, which some people, when they come, there seems to be a movement disorder, but it's quite mild.
Yeah.
They're more affected by the psychological issues, like something more akin to choking. So we don't, nobody, I should say, knows exactly what it is. In putting is probably a bit more clearly defined. In many cases, they think it's a focal task dystonia, which is this like overuse syndrome, overuse under pressure, high levels of repetition and precision. So putting is ripe for people to get a focal task dystonia, because people do a lot of putting, a lot of repetitive stuff, using devices at times that maybe enforce like high levels of precision or insist on high levels of precision. So I would just go easy on that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with those devices, but if they're overused, you're potentially inviting, if you're prone to the problem, you're maybe inviting it by over practicing, and especially trying to over practice with high levels of precision.
Now, you didn't say this before, but it made me think too, because I've seen a bunch of things about putting yips. But in your surveys, did you get many kids, young people, 15 or younger, that did the survey?
Tony, you might get me there. I have a list of the
Well, I don't mean to
ages.
get you, but I'm just curious.
No,
Kind of...
no, I found it. I'll just tell you then. What do we got? The average, people who did the surveys, they took 22.6 years on average to develop the yips.
Oh.
So it looks like this thing takes a while to develop. And the ages, yes, to answer your question, I mean, as young as 15, but as old as 86.
Oh, wow.
Something like that. And the 86-year-old he'd played golf for 70 years before it emerged.
Boy, yeah.
No, I mean, some of that could be age related. We always say this to people, go to a junior event and there's 100 kids playing. You might see one or two with the yips. Go to an amateur event and you might see, with 100 people, you might see 5 or 6. Go to a more experienced, like a mid-amateur type thing, and you'll see a few more with the yips. Go to a seniors tour event, or whatever, Champions Tour, Legends Tour, and you'll see a lot more guys who are working around the problem, often with putting in particular. So it looks like it takes time to develop, although there are some people who had it since they started.
Wow.
That was their experience, but quite often they've come from racket sports. There's some great research in Germany. German researchers, Martin Klamp stands out there as a guy who's a leading light. And he said in his research that you're 66% more likely to get the yips if you've played a lot of rackets before you take up golf. Which interesting stat.
Right.
But yeah, so it seems to transcend age to some extent, but I would say most people, what did I say, like 22 and a half years it takes to develop on average with the group I had.
Yeah.
So it takes some time, and they will be older by then.
Yeah. Well, sort of the ending kind of phases of your research, you had some you started creating an intervention or interventions to help golfers overcome the chipping yips, but I was just as interested in hearing, you started out with a particular intervention, but then you kind of tweaked it, is what I think you did, right? Based on what the initial things that you did were. So maybe talk about that a little.
I did. What I tried to do within my thesis was to emphasize the benefits of dual tasking. And dual tasking is, as it sounds, doing two things at the same time. But you have to have these things distinct, and you have to be able to measure them. So I had read some research and been influenced by the inner game of, the inner game of golf was my primary influence. And it's not research based, but it is a practitioner's point of view with Timothy Galway. And for example, Galway's humming, if you've read the book, or Galway's in tennis, it was back hit or bounce hit. Sorry, wasn't it? When the ball bounced, they say bounce and then say hit when you hit the ball. So that is dual tasking, because these people are doing something else as they play tennis, or as it came into golf. Galway had them humming or saying things like back hit in golf, or 1, 2, 3 hit as they swung. And I thought that was an interesting concept, and I'd used it a lot with people, with the Yips over the years with some success. And I thought this maybe has a more official term, this, inner game type stuff. And it was dual tasking. And dual tasking, though, in the research is associated with performance issues. If I'm texting on my phone when I'm walking down the street, I can do it, but I'm not, I'm liable to have an accident, more likely.
Right.
Yeah. And, if you dual tasking often in the research, also it degrades the performance of the primary task. So say it's, I don't know, throwing a basketball into a hoop, if people are asked to count backwards from 100, performance was at times adversely affected. But recently, the research has come around, especially in rehabilitation, to actually recognizing the benefits, and that not everybody suffers a decrement in performance. And this was Galway's point in the inner game, although he never used the term dual tasking. He just called it inner game or natural learning. It was putting the person in a situation where they weren't trying so hard. But anyway, the rehabilitation research is replete with this stuff where, if you've had a stroke, or I've had a stroke and I lose some movements, I have to relearn that movement. Let's say it's walking. And of course, if I'm thinking how I walk, I'm not walking very efficiently, and any distractions might make me fall over. So what the rehabilitation people do is they have people walk and at the same time maybe take their wallet out of their pocket and hand a credit card to the therapist. And what they've noticed is that during the phase where they're taking the wallet out and giving, this is just one example, giving the card to the rehabilitation person, the physiotherapist, the walking gait improved. And there's a number of other aspects of human movement that seem to be improved by dual tasking. So I wanted to test that for the chip and yips and say, well, if I can get them doing something else and really immersed in that, it distracts them, okay, but the neuroscience would say it forces subconscious processing on the primary task, which would be chipping in this instance. So if I'm busy counting backwards from 10 as I chip, and I'm giving that my full attention and performing that task well, then in theory, the movement control will go back to what they call procedural memories, as opposed to declarative memory. So it means I'm chipping on, I could chip on automatic, as opposed to this disruption that we see in the Yips. So that was the basic premise. I wanted to use dual tasking, which can seem, frivolous at times because people are humming, people are saying words as they swing, they're counting backwards. For some people, they're thinking, how the hell is this going to help me? But if you can find the right dual task, it does help. And that's what my first initial I did a 3D analysis again on the Yippers, but this time they were dual tasking. I gave them 2 different dual tasks. And okay, 2 out of the 9 had adverse reactions to it. And that can happen because dual tasking it can be linked to poor performance. But 7 of these people had really improved performance in terms of how close they chipped the ball to the hole. They were subjectively rating their movement quality, and that aspect I described to you where the hands were in a funny position at impact. Statistically, that was significantly improved while they dual tasked.
Yeah.
So that was some, really, there's only 9 people. As I said, 7 really improved, 2 went the other way. So I thought, okay, there's something in this. And I didn't coach them. It was a really brief intervention. I just said something like, we're investigating the effect of this on your chipping. Can you, hum as you chip? So it's like a steady hum, like Galway suggested in the inner game. Just a and they had a few practice goes. If they have the yips, you can hear the yips interfering with the hum, actually. So it's actually a reasonable way of deciding if you have the yips. And then they just chipped 10 balls. I gave them no coaching. I just monitored them to see how they were doing on the dual task. And then they did another one randomly assigned the order of these things. They did a word generation task. And they said 3 words, one on the backswing, one on the downswing, and one when the ball landed. So all these tasks were generated rather than I was asking them to recall something or to hold something in memory or to process something as they did it. These are dual tasks that are generated by the individual.
That's fascinating. So that was the first way you kind of did it, right?
Yeah, and that was
reasonably
that
successful,
was
right? Yeah.
It was successful. The two who weren't successful, and this maybe is worth mentioning, they were 2 of the older guys in the group. And as we get older, dual tasking or multitasking, if you want to call it that, is more difficult. And these guys, they just fell apart because they couldn't. I remember the humming. One guy would hum on the backswing, stop, and then think about what he was doing, start the downswing, and try and start humming again. He just couldn't do the 2 things at the same time, and it was not good with him. I mean, I coached him a little bit before he did the actual official test to try and, I helped him to say, just keep it going. It doesn't matter where the chip goes. Just you hum as well as you can. And nope. And the other guy was the same. He just really struggled to not, his mind was on the chipping and he just couldn't get it away from it. So these guys really struggled. But the rest, one guy was really poor, young guy, like 39, was a 5 handicap, out to 12 because of the chip and yips. And as he went through it, he really got going on the humming and it just smoothed out his movement. I mean, I could see it. But then we had the evidence as well from the results of his shots and also his 3D analysis. So that was cool. So
the guys that and maybe you did this or not, did they then go back and try to not hum and see if they maintain the movement pattern that's changed? Or I don't know if you did that or not.
I mean, there's a really brief intervention. It lasted around 15, 20 minutes total. And to be fair to these guys, when they finished the experiment and I could open up about what I was doing, I did give them some help afterwards. That guy with the humming, I just said to him, who improved with it, I said, you got to go with this. And you've got to maybe try and get over the fact that it sounds a bit weird. You've got to maybe tone it down when you're playing with your friends, but practice it. And the better quality hum that you'll do, usually the better quality movement that this guy would get. But yeah, I mean, we did it more with the final intervention. Tony, I went back after the intervention, which took 6 months this time, and I gave them time to unlearn it, if you know what I mean. But they were all still okay, They were maintaining their performance, which I need to go into what I did with these guys.
So you came back 6 months later with the guys that you did the initial intervention with, then?
Right. No, actually, I had moved country by this time, and I was in Norway. Okay. So I had moved from the UK to Norway, and I had a brand new cohort I had 10 initially. I had 14 people make themselves available because it was a 6-month intervention. It took a fair bit of commitment. But some didn't have the chip and yips. Some couldn't commit. So we ended up with 5 people, all men, as it happens, in the final phase. And the goal was, I tested these guys 3 times with a chipping performance test to just establish that they had a chronic problem. It wasn't going anywhere. And they all had that. And then the idea in the final intervention was to build on my research from 2015, a little paper I published, and use a pre-performance routine, like a pre-shot routine, we would call it in golf, and integrate the dual task into the 2 seconds or so that players are moving and hitting the ball. Because often pre-shot routines are exactly as they sound. It stops when the player draws the club back. Maybe there's a swing thought, but there's not that much written about what people think about in swing, but I knew the Yippers were prone to problems right at the ball. So with these 5 guys, we varied in handicap from 6 up till I think about 20. We started off by just establishing, what they could do and what they couldn't do, because most Yippers will have at some point something they can do, from a very good lie, a certain distance chip, they can usually do that.
Yeah.
Or make a better job of that. Yeah. So we started by practicing that, and then I developed a pre-shot routine around their needs. So some of them were very nervous. So, we maybe had elements of self-talk or just some sort of relaxation strategy that they had to learn. Sometimes like something like progressive muscle relaxation. One guy used, he just would tense his whole body and then relax, and over time became accustomed to that and would relax just after he had the tension. But we stuck to an established model. A researcher, Singer, way back in the 80s, proposed like a pre-shot routine, pre-performance routine model where players would ready themselves. So I guess the relaxation strategy would fit in there, readying. Then they would image. They would visualize what the task would, or what the ball should do. Then they would focus their attention. Then they would execute, and that's where the dual task was placed. And then they'd evaluate. So that's Singer's 5-step
evaluate is huge
model
too, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it didn't start off that good because these guys had a chronic problem. The first lesson I would also tidy up any obvious technical flaws, because I think that's worth mentioning. If somebody has the ball in completely the wrong spot or just poor technique, I think that's your starter for 10. Tidy up the technique and find a place they can operate. For some people, it's like give them enough balls and they'll be okay. So like ball number 1 was terrible, but ball number 5, if they're just hitting the same shot, might be okay. So you'd allow a lot of that blocked kind of style practice, and you find out what they can do, and go from there. And then the next step was to try and select a dual task, because it's very specific, very personal. What works for one person doesn't work for the next. The humming works for quite a few people, but some people don't like it or really don't think it's a good thing to do. So we tend to move to more counting tasks. They can be very effective, counting backwards. And when they start with these things, particularly the humming, you can hear the interruption just as they hit the ball. They'll be trying to hum, but then it'll either stop or there'll be a big blip, like a speed bump, we ended up calling them. There'll be a speed bump right in the middle of the hum or the counting. The guys are supposed to count down like you're working at NASA or something. It's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 in a steady rhythm. And so they'll start the countdown just before they chip. And so they'll be 10, 9, and then they start 8, 7, and then there's a gap. 6, 6, and then they hit the ball. So sometimes there's a gap, and that's them. That's whatever. Their attention is shifting during that and coming away from the dual task and onto chipping. And that usually causes problems because their chipping is dysfunctional. So that's what we'd work on. I'd work on saying to them, come on, get these numbers out. You can get them out as if you were counting down at if it was a rocket launch. And as they improved their, the numbers and how the rhythm of what they were saying, in general, 2 of the guys that used the countdown, they improved their their movement as well. So that was important, but the pre-shot routine was there as well to focus their attention, to try and give them a real point of focus for the whole 30 seconds or so that it would take. And then the dual task was there as something that we knew should help them to send better motor commands from the brain to the muscles.
Is it sort of like, as I listen to you, is it sort of like try to get the mechanics a little better, but then get yourself out of the way because there's other things going on in your mind that are fighting you. So you get over the fighting part, right? Because everybody has embarrassment and all those kind of things with yips, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when they come to you, Tony, or they come to your pro at the club, they have got a, what do they call it? And the doctors would call it comorbidity, don't they? When you've got maybe more than one health issue. I think these chip and yippers come to you with a motor disorder, undiagnosed or undefined still, and the psychological baggage of having this movement disorder and the embarrassment it's caused. And for some, it's tournament players, it's their livelihood is on the line. I've dealt with a lot of professionals and they are seriously stressed by this thing because it's taken away their income and potentially their career. So I think you've got to deal with it in two ways. I tend to address the motor problem first by trying to get them chipping better and not cured. I would refrain from that word, but chipping better in training, and then start to expose them gradually through something like systematic desensitization or graded exposure. Expose them gradually to challenges. And that's the biggest problem with the professionals. They want it fixed today.
Everything.
So they can play next week. And that's just not how it works. These guys that I helped, it took 6 months and they all significantly improved. But none of them are yip free. It comes back. But they're managing it. They're managing it much better. They can generally play golf again and function under pressure, even though it's not the preferred thing. And in time, the professionals already have the skills of concentration, because that's what I feel like I'm doing with the amateurs, is teaching them how to concentrate first. But the pros have that, so that you can work faster with the pros for sure. But you still, I'm still pretty adamant that the research that I did, that the dual task was a really integral part. And okay, maybe there is the odd thing that you can't really hum and play golf, but you could hum really low. It's embarrassing, or it's socially, there's a bit of a stigma to it. Or if you're counting numbers, you can do it in your head or very quietly to yourself, or counting backwards, or if it's a rhythm-based problem like 1, 2, 3 hit. And I got them to hold the follow through as well, got them thinking past the ball. 1, 2, 3 hit, hold, or 1, 2, 3 hit, land when the ball landed. And that kept it fresh, because the ball, if it's a different length chip, it lands at a different time every time. So you have to pay attention.
Yeah.
And I can measure that. I can watch these guys say 1, 2, 3 hit, hold, and I can check whether the words coincide with the actions. When their ball lands, I'm expecting them to say land. If they say land before the ball lands, I know they weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
So a combination of concentration, improving concentration and attention, Tony, and also this idea that the dual tasks can help to maintain movement, especially when its movement has been dysfunctional.
It's pretty amazing that you worked through all that in 7 years and found all kind of things like that. So are you working with a lot of people now then, as we sort of, kind of end up today? But, any specific final words for golfers who are struggling with chipping yips? And I guess we could say putting yips too in a little way, but with your focus on what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah, I would say with putting yips, the easiest thing to do is work around it. Whether people know it or not, it's a dominant hand problem with the putting yips, which probably means in most cases it is this focal dystonia. So But once you know it's the right hand, if you're right-handed, then you can just get it out of play with grips like the saw grip or the claw grip. The claw works well if it's mild. If it's severe, the claw, you need to go to the saw. I mean, if it's severe, and get your elbow pointing almost away from the target line, or just get your right hand immobilized somehow.
Yeah.
Some players have what they call a ghost right hand. It's on the club, but it's barely touching. Or, they just take it out of the way and put predominantly with their left hand, but the right hand's on for the ride.
I played with a guy that was doing that the other day, a good friend, and he was kind of letting go of the club, and actually he didn't really realize it.
Yeah, I mean, you could go left-handed. You just putt with your left hand only. As long as your dominant hand is being taken care of. Or I mean, I mentioned the Sam Lab inventor Christian Marquardt earlier on. I took a lead from some of his research where he tries to it's called motor retuning, and essentially, a lot of the guys with putting yips are pretty often have a straight line stroke. They're almost trying to hold the blade square as they hit the ball, or even close it on the way back, open it on the way down. That's what I've seen quite a bit. It just teaches them to rotate the putter, a bit like Tiger Woods does in his warm up. He warms up with his right hand only, and rotates the putter face because he believes in releasing it, and that seems to be some kind of antidote if players want to try that. Just make sure the toe, the club face opens up on the backswing. Do it with your dominant hand, opens up on the backswing and then closes as you hit the ball. And if it's quite mild, I've had some success in eliminating it by just retraining that movement.
Yeah.
And that's Christian Marquardt's idea, not mine.
Yeah. I've seen David Orr do things with an 8802 putter. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But
I know who he is, but I haven't seen that, no.
But it's on his Flat Stick Academy website, I think, and he's talked about it. But that putter rotates, boy. And it's an old style putter, but it is very easy to allow it to rotate. And there's a lot of putters out there these days where people want them not to rotate, not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, and again, the Sam Putt Lab, it's like I'm doing an ad for the Sam Putt Lab here, but
right.
The Sam Putt Lab or the other device, I just can't think of the name of it right now. They seem sensitive enough that you can detect it, even when players say things like, oh yeah, but it only happens in tournaments. My experience is that's not true. It's just the anxiety does exacerbate the problem, but it's there nonetheless.
Yeah. And
Sam Lab and Capto, is it called?
Sure.
Yeah, they're sensitive enough to pick it up. If they putt with their right hand only on one of those devices, you'll see the maladaptive rotations. So it's not very often that you meet someone who actually is only yipping in under pressure. It's not often I've had that. And the other myth I would say is people say, I only do it from like 5 feet and in. Now, that's not true either as far as I'm concerned. It's there. They just don't notice it on the longer putts, if you know what I mean. So there's a couple of myths, I would say. And then on the chip and yips, I think it's sensible to eliminate any bad technique first. So you'd see your pro, go and have a lesson with your pro, and maybe, the pro, my goal is to get the research out there so pros begin to understand the use of dual tasks, because we had an instant success with over 3/4 of our cohort with the dual tasks. So, if pros maybe knew a little bit more about dual tasking, they might be able to just, like I have a template with hundreds on it. Like whistling is one of the things I've started to get players to do recently, or just, blow in a certain direction out your mouth when you're chipping. Anything at all, really. Say your favorite football players' names in the swing. It doesn't appear to matter, and the long game seems to respond well to similar things. The dual tasking, but the putting does not respond at all to dual tasking. So let's just maybe make that clear. I'm not advocating dual tasking for putting because it seems to be this focal dystonia, which is impervious to any kind of attention control exercises. So you've got to go with the more of the work around, or try and retrain the movement. I mean, the latest thing, Tony, just sorry if I'm racing ahead here,
No,
but
you're fine.
Why is golf so affected? And I've been influenced again by the German researchers. And in one of their papers, they mentioned that they didn't have any research to support it, and they didn't cite any papers, but they thought it's caused by classical conditioning. And so classical conditioning is what Pavlov's dogs was all about. If you know that story where Pavlov was actually a physiologist, and he was studying digestion, wasn't he? And he rang a bell and fed these dogs in order to study their digestion. So he just rang the bell to attract their attention and then fed them, and repeated this over many weeks, I believe. But eventually then, I think one day he just forgot to bring out the food for the dogs, and he rang the bell, and all the dogs appeared, salivating. So they had a conditioned response to the bell. The unconditioned response is the salivating when you smell food. That's a human or an animal reaction. It doesn't have to be conditioned. But he noticed that they produced the reaction in the absence of food. So it was the bell. This bell has nothing to do with food, really. This conditioned stimulus that was the bell generated the saliva in these dogs. And so golf. And like I said, I got the inspiration from the German researchers, but I've been thinking about it. And classical conditioning often occurs in tasks where there's a fixed time frame between presenting one stimulus and the other. So you think about a downswing in golf, a downswing and then ball contact come pretty much at the same time every time, say a quarter of a second, something like that. But then, so why would people jerk in anticipation of the ball? Well, my theory is that golf is a very sensation-rich sport. You and I, if I hit a bad putt, like as soon as I've hit it, I know it's bad. And I might react to that. I might have a physical reaction, like a kind of a flinch. I think maybe you saw it last year when Rory McIlroy, and I'm not saying Rory McIlroy has the yips, by the way, he doesn't. I don't think so. Well, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
But when he at the US Open, when he missed those 2-3 footers, if you watch one of those 3 footers, he knows he's missed it as soon as he's hit it, and he kind of straightens up, like has a bit of a reaction to it. And I think if that sort of thing happens over and over again, then this classical conditioning between the downswing and the jerk can occur. And you think about chipping. Chipping is worse for sensations. You fat it, you thin it, you whatever. You hit something unexpected and you flinch. Probably. I noticed it in myself the other day. I hit a chip shot and I topped it. And I thought, how the hell did I do that?
Oh boy.
But I flinched. I'm supposed to be a professional. I flinched when I did it. And I thought, there you go. So if that continues to happen, then my brain learns wrongly that the downswing of my chipping might be associated with jerking or flinching. Flinching is probably what it is. And with this classical conditioning, the behavior, the flinching, often comes before the stimulus. So it'll come before I strike the ball, if it becomes conditioned. So in golf, we have a sensation-rich sport, a really small implement, a small ball sitting on the ground, a high likelihood of strange sensations, and a fixed temporal relationship between when you start your downswing and when that sensation is going to come. And I've had some psychologists say, no, that's not going to be classical conditioning. But, what other explanations do we have? So at the moment, that's my pilot research at the moment, is to take this one chap who's very bad, and in order to break the conditioning, we have to have him chip quite a lot without yipping.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find somewhere he can chip without yipping, or get him chipping without yipping, and just repeat it. Because in balance tasks, they can give people a conditioned reaction within about 20 on a balanced platform. If say I'm standing on a balanced platform and you sound a buzzer, and then 1 second later the platform moves erratically, so I lose my balance. That's repeated, and eventually they just sound the buzzer, and after 1 second, the people standing on the platform move as if the platform moved, but it hasn't. So they can condition this like flinch, this balance reaction in very short time, but they can also decondition them quite fast too. If they sound the buzzer and don't move the platform, and sound the buzzer and don't move the platform, after about 15 goes, the brain realizes, oh, okay, no, this doesn't move anymore. So something akin to that with golf, where if you can get people chipping without yipping in some shape or form, and just repeat that as much as you can without yipping, then potentially we could extinguish it. I think that's the right word to use. But yes, I'm just starting on that to try and see, could classical conditioning be the reason for why yips is so prominent or so prevalent in golf?
It sounds like a great thing to get to work on.
Yeah, but that I'll keep you posted. It's just a pilot study for now, Tony. I'm kind of studied out at the moment. I've got to give some golf lessons.
I get that.
Yeah, but
I went through that.
There is hope. I mean, that's the thing about the yips. There doesn't seem to be a quick fix. But it does seem like if you can, in chipping yips at any rate, if you can teach people to concentrate, give them a personalized pre-shot routine, and integrate a dual task in there, which kind of diverts their attention and re-automates the movement, then there's hope. You can improve. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Well, this was a great discussion, and we thought we weren't going to do it, and then we did it, and all those kind of things. Back around October, I thought I wasn't going to do any more episodes, so I'm glad we got to do this. I'll put links in the show notes to your email and your Twitter account, and who knows, maybe someday you're going to have a paper about your research. I bet you will.
Yeah, that's the next step. Apparently it's publishable. But it's the effort, Tony, and the knockbacks that you get from various publications. They're very strict, of course. They'll try and tear it to bits, but But I'm gonna release the findings to the PGA and GB&I, of which I'm a member of, and I'm happy to share whatever I've got with people if they contact me, and maybe point them towards someone who might be able to help. A golf coach in tandem with a psychologist. That's how I started out many, many years ago. I got a psychologist to help me, and I was the golf coach. That might work. So if a player sees a coach and then has a couple of sessions with a psychologist to try and learn a pre-shot routine, or, I think it's within the remit of your PGA professional. We know enough about pre-shot routines to teach them to people. It's the dual tasking is maybe the missing link. That's the only thing. But yeah, go and see your pro, get tidied up, and then start to learn how to manage your attention.
The Golf Improvement Podcast is sponsored by David Orr and the Flatstick Academy, putting instruction without all of the bull. www.flatstickacademy.com.
I continue to be beyond excited that David Orr and the Flatstick Academy are my sponsor for continuing my podcast and website in 2025. In the link I've provided, you'll see that David has created more than 385 Flatstick videos, more than 7,000 hours of content, and 90 premium articles. One of my all-time favorite recent videos, free for all Flatstick subscribers, is Short Putt Focus, Habits and Behaviors. Interestingly, these habits ultimately can lead to the putting yips. It's a must-watch video. Subscriber cost is $9.99 a month. Incredible value for the money, especially if you want to stop being swayed by much of the awful putting content you see from Dr. YouTube. I've greatly benefited from David's academy and yearly conferences for many years. See www.flatstickacademy.com for more details. Well, Gordon, again, thanks for this wonderful interview discussing the results and successes from your Chipping Yips PhD research. Gordon will be happy to discuss some of his research results with anyone who contacts him, either by email at gordon@vgk.no or at his Twitter X handle, which is @GolfGordon. I put a link to his contact information in the show notes. My shout-out today is a double one, Vertex Golf and my PodTrack P4. I've been using the Vertex Golf putting motion sensor for about 6 months now, and it's an amazing putting measurement tool available at an extremely reasonable price. I've used it personally at home on my putting mat and also with the Roan State golf team members. It is for sure an up-and-coming putting improvement tool. Learn more about Vertex Golf at vertex-golf.com. And also thanks this week to my old reliable Zoom PodTrack P4 podcast audio device. I thought I was going to use another way to record the audio for this podcast, and when that didn't work, I was quickly able to regroup and use my PodTrack. It's an amazing audio recording device. One final thing, if you click the link in the show notes for this episode, you can see all of my favorite previously published podcast content on YouTube. I hope you subscribe to my YouTube podcast channel and also like the episodes you listen to through YouTube. Thanks. Well, that's it for today. John Paul Guidry with Guidry Golf and Sports has been helping me with some light weight work and stretches, and I'm about to take a deeper dive into one of his physical improvement programs. John Paul will be on my next episode in early March. Until then, take care, God bless Ukraine, and God bless America.
Game Improvement Golf, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time. www.gameimprovementgolf.com